There's something in this box. Don't know what. Tommy won't tell me what's in the box. What's in the box?
I don't want to ruin the surprise. I got this as a Christmas present because, well, the Christmas present will show you what this episode is going to be about, but we're talking about MX5s, so don't let the fact that the box is on a low cost fool you. The low cost that'll have an MX5 engine, so technically there's a tenuous link. Anyway, I diverge. Do you want to open the box?
No, you open the box. A thing.
There you go, a thing.
What is that?
It doesn't tell you what it is.
What actually is that? It doesn't really give much away, does it? Oh, okay.
You still know what it is, do you?
It's some sort of storage device.
For?
I'm assuming that looks like camshafts to go there.
Yes.
And lifters,
Yes.
maybe. And springs.
And valves.
That's quite good. That's quite handy.
So I've seen this, it's been in my eBay watch list for a while.
Probably too long.
And you know that way where you're like, you've got things in your eBay watch list, but you're like, I don't really. And then somebody bought me it for Christmas when they asked me what I want. We were filming there for a good 2 minutes.
With no sound.
And then Daniel was like, have you did the thing with the mics that you need to do every time you use these stupid mics?
To make the sound work.
And I hadn't, so
there was no sound.
why were we even talking about country music?
Because it was in your head. Because it's that good.
It's not in my head anymore.
I'll get it back in your head though.
In a previous episode, Daniel likes country music, and we've done a substantial amount of work, which is probably another episode that you've either seen or are about
We'll
to see.
see.
On Daniel's Primera, and as it is his locale, he dictated the music, which was a lot of country music.
There was quite a lot of country music, to be fair.
George Strait's, to be specific. Which
But it did help. It did get us through. It got us through the difficulties.
the difficulties.
It did. It was stuck in Tommy's head, so I'm going to make sure that I put it back in his head. So
It's better than spinning the seal.
spinning seal's good as well, though. Did you read the instructions?
No.
No, you didn't. Of course you didn't.
This doesn't have instructions.
Oh, okay.
I think they assume if you're smart enough to take a cylinder head apart,
You probably.
you're going to
Oh,
know.
look! It's got these wee rubbery kind of things that hold stuff together.
So this isn't exactly the design juice. Obviously, we'll strip this out. But
It's not a stand.
It
but
does make moving the head around a bit easier because they're really scratch the face of the bottom of it. But this is a BP4W MX5 head. That means it is applicable for my blue MX5 and nothing else. We have decided in our effort to make as much humanly possible power out of this without forced induction,
Yeah.
to go into some pretty anal levels of headwork.
most of the stuff, obviously, you've seen is all turbo stuff, where head flow is not massively important.
You can take a few liberties because you're forcing air in.
Yeah, if the bottom end's strong enough and you can hammer enough air through even a bad port design, it's still going to make power. With this, we do not have that luxury.
If you imagine the MX5 as it stands now, we've got throttle bodies that are on here. We can go into all the other detail and we'll get the whiteboard out in a minute, but we have to make the throttle bodies optimised to the head design and the head design optimised to the throttle bodies. So the big wild thing that we're going to do in this is taking a leaf out of Volvo's book in the late 90s to early noughties,
Yeah.
and really mess with the intake angles.
Yeah.
But we'll come to that shortly.
The most basic way, any engines, right, the only way you really make power out of them is you make them bigger, which we don't have really that luxury of doing
Or
with the
the appetite
MX5.
for, because it's not got the
Yeah.
thickest of cylinder walls. Stroking it, it's
Yes.
already not an over-square engine. Adding a stroker kit,
It's going to make it. It's not. The benefits will not be worth it.
No.
So, and there's also
Just to clarify, what I want is a high revving engine.
Yes.
Stroker kits don't go well
yes,
with
and the thing with this is not like Toyota with the old 4A engines and stuff. You can steal bottom ends off of other engine families that you can then basically plop the head on, and you just get like a big massive displacement version. We can't do that.
The BP was as meaty as they ever made,
Yes.
that generation of
Yes.
engine.
But the thing is, the revving higher thing is where it comes to this, because just revving an engine higher and not making any more power is pointless. This is the key.
The fast route to the dark side as
Yes,
well.
you need to have enough airflow to actually make power up there.
But
so
that's for the whiteboard. Anyway, first things to note It's a twin cam engine, it's a 16 valve, as per anyone from the 90s will say that's good performing. It is, however, a fairly narrow angle head. We'll touch on that shortly. You've got 4 intake runners for 8 valves, so they split in these ports. They're obviously machined to a fantastically low budget, so there's going to be very little in the way of performance
really bad.
here.
They're really
Similarly, if we look to the front, you will see that we've got an intake for coolant here, and we've got an extake or exhaust for coolant at the back, and none of that is utilised in the engine's design, but many people in MX5 forums will tell you about how that should actually work. But for the front wheel drive application that they ripped this out of, the Mazda 323, the coolant return is here, which is horrible, and we'll look to improve on that. The exhausts share the same problem with the intakes in that there's just 4 ports for 8 valves, absolutely no flow considerations whatsoever.
The main use for this engine in most Mazda cars was a nice, reliable economy car.
Which is great for, which is not what I want.
then when they wanted to make power with it, like the 323 GTX, they just put a turbo on it, which is the easy path.
Further architectural problems, you'll see just how narrow this head is at the bottom. The actual physical meat of the head is literally halfway in line with where the cams are, so the actual meat that we can improve for flow is very, very limited. Similarly, that also means that the coolant ways are very, very narrow. You don't have a lot of heat excavation because there's very little coolant in there to deal with it. That also has an implication for oil ways. So the cams obviously take oil, and then you've got to put oil into the engine once they're done with it. There's very, very little going on there. Hi.
Oh.
So looking into the top of the head, you'll see that there's 2 cams, and they've got cam buckets directly onto the valves, which is not a bad design.
It's lightweight. It's not a lot of kind of inertia to move around, so that's good.
But the clearances for these are run with shim over buckets. Not the best. You're actually better putting shim under bucket, but I don't think there's a lot we can do with that.
These are hydraulic lifters, okay?
Yes.
So most hydraulic lifters are kind of out of steam like once you get past 7k.
Yeah.
This engine's going to go past 7k, so these are going to collapse. Also, if you imagine, if the bigger the cam lobe that you put in here, right, the more tendency you have of, rather than just pushing down on the lifter, you're actually trying to push across the lifter, which has a habit of just pinging these shims out.
I'm not exactly getting any awards from Tony Hart from this one, but that's basically what we've got here. We've got camshaft, we've got the bucket lifter, the bucket shim lifter thing. Wow, use your words, Tommy.
The hydraulic lifter.
The hydraulic lifter. We've got the valve here, valve spring, and this is the head.
Put a wee shim in as well.
We'll put the shim in as well, because that's vital for this drawing. A normal cam duration is pretty narrow, so it'll maybe come down like that, which means that as it laps on, it takes a nice gradual push to open the valve. Once you get into a place where you want bigger cam duration, this happens, and you will find that's going to just slap in there quite aggressively and bang that open. Also, another thing's going to happen once this bigger cam duration comes into play. This head meat, well, that's in the way. Quite a bit.
This is something that doesn't affect a lot of engines, but this is especially bad for it. You're going to hit these.
So what we're going to have to do in this instance is take quite a bit of that out in order for the cam, if we put a big cam in, to actually activate on this and not clatter into the head. Yay! So again, apologies for the art, but they've got camshaft, that's your bucket, that's your lifter, that's a hydraulic insert for it. We've got the valve and we've got the valve spring. So what will happen is, as your engine is cold, this is what goes on. There's always a gap because, well, if you remember old Ford engines from the 80s and 90s, that you fire up and it clatters. That's pretty much non-hydraulic lifters.
That's just mechanical.
There's always going to be a gap, and there needs to be a gap because of thermal expansion. All of this shit will actually warm up quite a bit, and that gap gets taken out. The problem is, on a cold engine, the gap has to be there, and that makes it sound like a bag of ass. So what you find on modern cars is that goes to there, and the gap is taken out here using a hydraulic lifter. That means that when oil pressure comes in, this chamber is taken up with oil pressure and a gap is reduced. So that means when we're off cam, that slack gets oil pressure against it, and the cam will come down, push that oil out, contact, and it all sounds nice and quiet.
Yeah.
The issue happens when this starts going 6,000 times a minute. That oil is just not sufficient enough to take up the gap, and a lot of clattering happens. It doesn't really enjoy life, and it's just a completely pointless exercise.
So me being from the SR land, where rockers just eject for fun, has quite a lot of experience in this. If you start to encounter valve float, you will actually lose the, not only with the, obviously with the lifter deflating being an issue, but if you start getting valve float, then this shim is no longer actually really up against the camshaft, so you are literally relying on that just staying there, which it won't.
Yeah.
It will fly out as soon as
we should also point out,
you get a rotation.
What is valve float? You'll hear this a lot in a lot of circles, and you'll actually hear it a lot on really shit max power videos where people in car parks are doing red line nonsense. So what valve float is, when this engine reaches about 6,500, 7,000 RPM, that's banging up and down a lot. And what will happen is, as that goes down, as the cam comes up and lets all that off, the spring doesn't act quick enough before the cam wants to come back round again. So the valve will start to float off of cam because the spring isn't strong enough. We'll come, remember that, it's going to be important in our quest later.
There is ways around this. We have.
Well, one simple way is, if you want to deal with valve float, you put two in. So you've heard of double valve springs. That's a small spring inside a big spring that increases the pressure. The other way is just to get a bigger spring. Now, a lot of companies will do fancy titanium, Christ knows what, valve springs, but my good God, you better have a thick wallet for it. What we're going to try and do is something in the middle. The last thing we want to talk about, because this is going to be very pertinent to what we're doing immediately, is something called flow dynamics. Now, if you're trying to move a volume of air, it has to move quick. Now, we've done a few performance exhausts, and you'll remember us saying that we don't want to have big bends, such as 90-degree stuff. The straighter a flow, the quicker the air goes. So, what does that mean when it comes to cylinder head time? Well, we've had a look at the NB's engine, and it's not good for the following reason. So, let's see if we can demonstrate this using a cross section. Now, if you look at the flange for the exhaust side there, you'll see it's 90 degrees to the head plane, right? Now that's fine, because that means there's just a 90-degree bend into the exhaust chamber. That, Daniel Cam, is where the fun ends. Look at the intake by comparison. You will notice that points down the way. Down the way. Why is that a good idea?
That's the opposite of what you want.
It's the opposite of what we want, but the thing about the down the way thing, if you look at the intake manifold, can you lift that manifold up from the box? That actually goes down, round, up, and then out. So that's fine, because you want a long runner length, because it does help performance. The only problem
everyday performance.
Everyday normal performance, right? However, to do that to a head means that we are going to have throttle bodies that go down the way. And when we charge air in, it's got to go up through the throttle body and then a longer than 90-degree turn.
Not great. Not good.
Not good is an understatement. It's absolute garbage.
It's as bad as it gets. I mean, a great example of a good head is if you imagine like motorcycle engines, like, you know, all the Suzuki, Yamaha and stuff like that. You look at how their throttle bodies are mounted.
Yes.
Now, their cylinder heads are basically sitting almost like 45-degree angle. And you look at the throttle bodies, they're almost sitting vertical. They're actually going, you know, almost like as close to a straight shot as you can imagine into the intake port.
And motorbike stuff revs to like 18,000 RPM. That's
why that's a good example of good head flow.
This is not great, right? Now, we've got a number of solutions we can come up with this. Right, my final art for the day looks like this. Cross-section of a piston block, cylinder head, cam. That's our intake, that's our exhaust. So this is not to scale. Best Doc Brown impression. But the chamber here is much more hemispherical, much more domed than we have in the MX5, but I can't be arsed scaling it. So that is what we're looking at. Our intake goes around that way. Now that might look like 90 degrees in the head, but we actually then have to do another 30, 40 degrees because it's got to go down the way, and now that's not great, okay? The only thing we've got to concern ourselves with is how do we A, make that flow as good as humanly possible, and B, what can we get away with? Now, the problem here is we can widen things out. There's always scope to widen things out. Port and polishing, right? This is what we're talking about. Porting is enlarging the port to be as massive as humanly possible without removing cylinder head with it. That means that you then lose compression because there's no meat between the two. I'm babbling, never mind. So if we were to port this, we would be looking at something like that. Obviously, our porting still has to meet the valve width, because if you port wider than that, it's not going to seal. Similarly, it's got to meet whatever our intake flange size is as well. So if we port beyond the size of what that intake or exhaust flange can possibly be, it's useless, because the restriction will then be your exhaust manifold. Yeah. We've got scope for the exhaust manifold, that's fine. It's also on a good route, we're not going to change too much. We will tidy that up, but there's also not as many gains to be had porting an exhaust as there is porting an intake.
If you just make it as big as possible, it will not actually flow better. No. There is an art, there is really, like, this is all fluid dynamics. Getting air to flow in and out of a head is actually really quite difficult. It's even, like, it's a lot of time you can find just something like that, kind of short radius there, just slightly changing the shape of that can make way more of a difference to head flow than just making them larger. So
yeah,
you need to, there's a lot involved in it to get it.
So what we need to consider though is getting rid of this radius. That's going to be our bigger problem. So you'll notice here I have drawn something accurate, and that is this protrudes from the head. Now we have quite a narrow body head, but the flange boss where this bolts onto does come out as an additional thing. So what we need is some way to take that, like this, add meat onto here, and then make this pen work, pens, come out like that, and then have our throttle bodies go on like this.
This is a wee leaf out of the NASCAR book, right? So as much as people laugh at NASCAR saying, oh, it's old tech and stuff like that, right? NASCAR guys were the absolute master of getting good flow out of what was bad cylinder head designs.
And they're really good at getting into family members too.
Right, anyway, so
good flow into bad heads. Now, what does that mean? I'm not drawing a V8, but go look at a cross-section of how convoluted that is compared to a four-cylinder. There's a lot more bends than this at play.
Yeah, the kind of bottom line of it is what they used to do is a small block Chevrolet head was a 23-degree angle, and they would reduce that to 18, which also had the benefit of changing the port angle as well, because on a V engine, when you shave a wedge into the head, you also change the angle of the port.
Trigonometry.
So we're going to take a wee bit of a leaf off of that and shave this back to get rid of that horrible bit at the top. And then with some kind of creative welding and stuff like that and machining, we're going to end up with getting rid of quite a lot of this bad area around the port.
So the question is, how much horsepower will all that net me? We're also going to obviously think about bigger cams, because the longer we can hold these open, the more airflow we can get. But to get that, we're going to have to modify the head further. Also, we need to reduce valve flow because we want to rev it higher, which means we need the valves to actually work. That means stiffer valve springs. 3 very simple tasks, which are going to be War and Peace.
It's going to take a long time. This is why no one tunes any engines. This is why they just turn.
And all of this, by the way, all of this, thousands of pounds, months of misery is going to net me what? 5
The same as 1 PSI of boost in your turbo engine.
Shut up.
There's also another fantastic way, right, of making air go in the engine artificially.
Add another 4 cylinders.
No, not that. You just spray nitrous into it.
The thing about nitrous is, right, the problem, right, and I can see his logic with nitrous, by the way, because technically it's not forced induction.
No, it's not.
Technically it is.
It kind of is, yeah.
But if I did swear that I wasn't going to use forced induction, then I'm just not getting the gains.
Artificial air?
a wee bit of spray.
It will work.
It will work. It's not going to hurt, is it?
No.
It will hurt. It will absolutely grenade my engine. Anyway. behold, one fully stripped head. It is no lighter, I'll point out, but at least it is stripped. As you've seen from the wee montage we did, there are a considerable amount of improvements we can make. So in the coming episodes, we are obviously going to do our proper deep dive on headwork, but we'll start getting into some of the nitty-gritty on where these improvements are going to make a difference and where they probably won't. Anyway, that's all for now. Patreon.com/toolsandtrack. Help support awesome content such as this, making sure there's no ads. No ads. That's got to be worth a punt. Also, if that's not for you, I get it. Like, bell, subscribe, and do the share thing at least because it's the only way we grew. And until next weekend, guys, stay safe.